What's going on, good people? Welcome back to another episode of Trading My Live Account. Today is day number 22, July 11, 2023. We made some trades today, so let's get into it. First thing we need to talk about today, let's talk about what happened in the pre-market. So in the pre-market, we had a pretty strong uptrend, and we continued that uptrend from around 3 o'clock this morning when the London session opened up until around the time that this screenshot got taken at 9:15. And then we kind of started to level out a little bit. We formed a consolidation zone, and that's what led us into the open at 9:30 this morning. So when the market opened, we broke out of the zone and had a large push to the upside that established this eventual swing high for this time period. Now notice we pulled back to the zone. We didn't quite come back to test the bottom, but we did come back to test the candle that was very prominent when the market opened at 9:30. I think this candle was the 9:31 candle. So very important for prices to come back and test that level. And then we eventually came back up and created this lower high right here. So once I saw the lower high get created, I drew a trend line. I started it from the swing high that was created from earlier, connected it through this lower high that we just established, and then extended it throughout the market. And that actually led to trades 1 and 2, but we'll get to that very soon. So after we created this lower high, we pushed back down to the bottom of the zone. We broke out past it just a little bit, created a a higher low with this candle right here, pushed back up into the zone all the way back to the top, and that actually led me to trade 1. Now, I went short right here after seeing a lower high and after prices retested the upper level of the zone. Now, anytime prices are in the zone, they typically have a tendency to stay within that zone until it's a price movement that just forces prices to break out of that zone because it's just so much pressure. But until you see that happen, you just gotta play the zone for what it is, a zone. So to me, that means that anytime I see prices attempt to break out, I always try and fade that move. So that's exactly what I was looking for trade number 1. I saw that the trend was down. I noticed that we had a zone. So I'm like, okay, if prices were to continue down, where would they continue down from? More than likely, the top of the zone would probably be the ideal spot for me, because one of the things I've been learning over these past couple of weeks was that some of my entries were really good. It was just the timing was off. So I might be right about the direction of the trade. Like I might be right that the trend is down, so I should short it. But I was shorting from lower prices last week, and that was really burning me because my prices were coming back to hit my stop. And usually my stop was the exact entry point that I should have got in at. So I kind of switched that around this week and started shorting from higher prices. So I said, if anything, people should be shorting from right here if they are looking for the downtrend to continue. So that's what I was thinking about at trade number 1. Now I would say my exit could have been a little bit better. I had my I had my original profit target very close to the bottom of the bodies down here where we initially broke out of the zone from a little bit earlier. Because I'm thinking that, okay, if the trend is down, we come back to retest what used to be previous support, so that should act as resistance now, and that's the top of the zone. We should definitely see a good wave of selling coming in, and eventually, that selling did come in, but that came in a little bit later in the market. It was still buyers in the market at this time period. So I was like, you know what, on the first touch of the top of the zone, sometimes it's better to just take it to the bottom of the zone and then just take your profit instead of trying to anticipate that breakout. And that's actually one of the things that I talk about in my trading plan, where I have it clearly written down. It says, don't try and trade the breakout version of the zone. Trade the zone from top to bottom or bottom to top, depending on which way you either go long or which way you go short. But just trade within the zone and don't try and trade the breakout. So I think that right there, even though it was a break-even trade, it's just another lesson about sticking to my plan, because it's not just about having a good entry. It's also about having a good exit so that I can lock in that profit. I think that's very important. So that was my mindset on trade 1, and that's what I learned from that. So after we see prices come back to the break even stop, they actually continue and moved up through the zone, but came back to retest the top of the bear trend line. Now, this is actually very similar to scenarios I've seen before, because anytime I have a bear trend line, it always feels weird trading it, because in order for prices to actually come back and test that trend line, they have to have a pretty decent move to the upside. So then when prices finally get to your trend line, you might have a debate about whether or not you should fade this momentum and try and trade against it, because in this scenario today, we saw prices move from 230 all the way back up to 280 in the span of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in the span of 6 minutes. Well, 5 to 6 minutes. So for prices to move that fast, that quickly, you have to ask yourself, should I go against that? But what I've learned from previous days, and that's actually something I want to go over. So let's go back to this chart from June 29th. We had a very similar setup. What I've learned from days like this is that you just got to take that short trade, even though you do have momentum coming up into that level, because when you're trading a bear trend line, that's actually just part of the entry that you have to accept. You have to accept the fact that buyers need to push the market back up to hit that trend line, and that's usually going to require some momentum. But you have to understand that more than likely that momentum is going to die down around that trend line. And that's actually what we saw today and what we saw on this day right here, June 29th. So notice how, just like today, we had prices push up at the open and then form a lower high. On this day, June 29th, this wasn't the open. This was at 8:30. We had news come out, but it was good enough momentum to make the market move. So we pushed up, created a swing high away from the zone, created a lower high, and then from that point, we were able to establish our trend line. Now notice how when prices moved all the way back down to the bottom of the zone, they had to make a significant move back up to test that trend line. So it's like, do you trade against that momentum? Because you already seen a lower high get established previously, that allows you to say, okay, you know what, even though I am trading against momentum, I'm trading in line with the trend, and that makes sense. Most of the time when you trade in line with the trend and you trade from the best possible prices that you can get, you usually have success in the markets. Not all the time, but most of the time. So that's just something you got to deal with when it comes to trading that trend line. Let me show you one more example. This is from June 13th this year also. So notice how we formed a swing high as we moved away from the zone, came back to create a lower high, which actually turned out to be a double top. It's top number 1, top number 2. From that point, once we have our lower highs, we can extend our trend line from the swing high past the lower high and extend it throughout the market and use that as our bear trend line. So notice that when we get to the bottom of the zone right here at around 210 on, this is June 13th, notice how we moved away and broke out of the zone significantly, but eventually came back not only to retest the zone breakout, but to retest that trend line right there. So look at how much momentum the market had coming up into that level. The bottom for this swing was around 510. So we moved from 510 back up to 550. And just a little bit further than that. So let's call it 555, back up to test the top of the zone. So we had a pretty significant move right there to get us back to the trend line. So you got to ask yourself, like, do I fight against that momentum? Because what would stop prices from coming back up to test the top of the zone? Well, then that's when you have to look at the market scenario that preceded prices moving up to test that trend line. Were we in a downtrend? Well, let's go back and see. We were making lower lows, lower highs, right? All throughout this formation. From the time we formed this swing high, we've been creating lower lows and lower highs. So yes, the trend is down. We've been creating lower lows and lower highs recently, so that means the trend is still down in the immediate time. So that means that even though we do have to trade against momentum, we can have confidence knowing that we're trading in line with the trend. And for me, even though I say all of this, like, okay, I'm trading in line with the trend, I still feel nervous when I take this setup. So what I like to do, what I did today was, I like to see prices come into this level, right? Let me see prices come into the trend line. And then I want to see how they react around the trend line. Because last week and these past like 2 or 3 weeks, actually, I've been putting my orders at levels where I expected a reaction without actually seeing what happened when prices got there. So what I learned is that let the price come into your level. See how prices react. And if you like what they do, then you take your trade. So notice for trade number 2, let's zoom in a little bit. Notice how I didn't go short exactly at the trend line touch. I let it touch the trend line, and then when I saw prices starting to move away from the trend line, that's when I entered into the short trade. So I saw prices come to my level, and then I waited for the reaction that I wanted. So I think I did a good job on that, and I was able to just take it back down to the bottom of the zone. I learned from last time on trade number one about taking proper profit targets. So I'm like, you know what? On this trade right here, I'm gonna lock it in. And after that, I was done for the day because I want to make sure that I come in and I take good trades. And when I feel satisfied, I just call it a day. And I think that's actually one of the biggest things that I've been learning over these past couple of months is that you want to stick to your program when it comes down to your trading. You have a trading plan. You know exactly what you want to do when you come into the market. And when you come in, you need to do that. You need to handle your business and then be done with it. I think one of the biggest problems I had today was having that inner battle with myself about taking two trades and being done for the day, and then pushing the issue and continuing to still trade because the trend is still there. Like, notice how after I took this second trade, the downtrend didn't stop. It came back to retest the trend line one more time right here. I could have caught a quick scalp from that, maybe about 20 points. And then it came back to retest the top of the zone once more. So I could have took the same trade that I took at trade two and been able to take it down to the bottom of the zone. So it's always going to be more on the table for you to have when you get done. But you got to understand that you have a plan. So I'm like, okay, I could go back in and take these trades, but it's not about that. It's about sticking to your program. For me as a trader, I'm not the type to come in and just get it all in one day. That's not me. I like to come in, take a chunk here, take a chunk there, call it a day, come back the next day and run it back and do it again. That's my style because I like to build confidence over time. Like, okay, I did it once, I did it twice, I did it 3 times, 4 times, 10 times, 20 times. Now I feel like every time I come into the market, I can make a good trade because I know I can take my 2 trades and I can be done. So for me, that's what works. And you got to do what works for you in the market. Every trader is going to be different. Everybody is probably going to use a very different strategy, but it all comes down to understanding what you do and what works for you and sticking to it. Because I wanted to come in today and keep pushing, but I decided to be disciplined and stick to my program because I know what works for me. It's opportunity all the time in the market. The market is going to be open tomorrow. It's going to be open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. There is no rush to take any trades because opportunity will always be there. So if I can get mine today, then I'm good. I'm done. Let me come back the next day and run it back. So when it comes down to it, it's all about discipline and sticking to what you know you should. And also, I just want to say one more thing. Trading is what you make it. There is no one specific way to do it. It's multiple ways to do it, but you also have to find what works for you. And I think that's the journey that I'm on as a trader. I'm 10 years into the game, but I'm still learning myself as a person and as a trader. And I think that's a continuous process. You can never master that. You can become proficient and very good at it, but it's always something to get better at. And tonight, going into my backtesting session, I want to focus on getting better at my exits. My entries are good. I take good trades a lot of times, but it's not just about taking the right trade. You also want to make sure you maximize the potential profits that you could get. And on trade one today, I just knew that I should have took profit at that zone, but it was something that said, nah, Ty, just hold it. And it came 4 points away from my profit target. So that made me want to hold it even more. Like, oh, it's 4 points away, Ty, just hold it. But no, it's not about that. It's about getting out at the right levels, and that's something I need to work on tonight. So what else? I think that's pretty much the biggest thing I need to focus on, and really just the never-ending process of focusing on my discipline. I also need to work on that too, but pretty much that's all I got for today, you guys. I learned a lot, actually, so I hope you guys did too. I'll be back tomorrow, July the 12th, 9:30 a.m. sharp. But until then, you guys, take it easy.